Muy buenas tardes, mi gente. Y aquí con ustedes otra vez la comadre B with another episode of Comadreando aquí con café. Como siempre quiero darles saludos. Hi, Mom. I would like to say hi to Mr. Felipe and Mr. Tap that was just with us over the weekend. If you missed that interview, check it out. It is really an interesting one. I would also like to say hello to all my regulars. If you guys found me by accident, please like, subscribe, and hit that little bell so you could get all my weekly uploads. I promise you guys I have lots of information to share. If you rather listen than watch, you can also find me on Spotify under Comadreando by La Comadre B. So I wanted to share an anniversary that we have today, 81 years ago, which are the beginning of a 5-day riot spree, a violent riot spree here in our beloved city of Los Angeles. If you are wondering what the heck is La Comadre talking about, yes, I am talking about the Zoot riots that began on June 3rd, 1943, and they spread across to June the 8th. So it was 5 days of continuous drama. Like I mentioned, a lot of violent riots and encounters, and it actually even spread further out till August, pero ese es otro día, otra historia. I want to focus on the beginning of these riots so that if you didn't know what occurred then, you can be in the know of how this horrific chain of events started and what was behind the motive of these riots. During these couple of days, the main target was young Mexican American men and minorities, which consisted of Filipino, Italiano, and African American. These are the guys that were getting targeted the most because at that time in that era, the Zoot was the thing of the fashion. Who are the ones committing these crimes? Who are the ones chasing these guys down? Okay, it was a variety of servicemen, including the military. We had the sailors and Marines. We also had the civilians, the white Angelinos, and the police department. Estos son los que andaban de desmadre with our youth of the moment. Although there was no deaths, thank God, there was over 150 people who were injured because of these said riots, and there was over 500 arrests in total. Era un desmadre y medio, raza. You can just imagine what these days were like. What was the motive? Besides racism, shocking, yes, it was these servicemen trying to remove the Zoot from these kids. Back in the day, the gang members were referred to as pachucos. In that era of the 40s, if you wore a Zoot suit, it was pretty much a known fact you were a pachuco or simply just rebelling against the era. So there you have it. Considering these main events took 5 days and a couple of extra months, I am going to divide into maybe 3 episodes what had happened in order so you guys can get the bottom line, because it was really one of those things that was just one of those things. We're gonna start with the reason behind this. Okay, like always, it goes back to racism, hate crimes, whatever. The American Angelinos of the moment here in Los Angeles, they didn't want the Mexican braceros in the area. It was a big race division because they just felt like they were very different being Mexican American born here rather than being Mexican coming through the border here. So that was a big race division that they already had. So there was a lot of tension just simply because you had the American, Mexican Angelinos, and you had the Mexicans that came through the border residents. Go figure, that is the beginning of a lot of what happened in this situation, in this era, in this time. So in 1942, there was a program known as the Bracero program, or a lot of you guys recognize the name by the Bracero Act. So this Bracero program, what it did was, it was an agreement between the Mexican government and the US government, which allowed Mexican citizens to come over the border and get temporary jobs here in the US with agriculture or with the railroads. It worked. It worked for the time. It spread for many years, and that is how a lot of people of that time were able to immigrate here and do it the legal way. Okay, so with World War II being in full force, the US was in very high demand for laborers. Everybody was caught up in the war. So the government thought this was the way to go. It would be very beneficial for us to be able to get the Mexicans over the border and come work for us. Cheap, obviously, but the work would get out. So yes, this program became very successful, and it ran for a total of 22 years. It began in 1942 and it ran straight across to 1964. So because of this act, because of this program, there was many contracts. That's what they called every case a contract that was legitimately open and closed. So once again, like I said, it allowed a lot of families to come here legally, like with this work visa, and they were later able to become naturalized citizens if they chose to. Total of 24 U.S. states straight across the country offered this program to these braceros, and a total of 5 million cases were open and shut because of this program. So it was a good time to become legal through this work program that they had back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Well, at this very moment that I speak of, these Mexicans that came through the border faced a lot of discrimination, ironically, in the work field. So they were putting in the work, they were putting in the hours, but they weren't getting paid what they should. And it was kind of unfair, but at the same time, that was part of your contract. You were coming in to pretty much get paid for labor, cheap labor, but that was the deal. You can come with that purpose to work. Also very popular at this time were the young Mexicans, the youth of the moment. They were constantly on the headlines, the LA Times, and not for good reasons. They were making out the youth, this youth, our youth, to be troublesome, to be delinquents, to be no good. There was constant headlines weekly about our kids, these kids acting out, and they were of course blowing things up, echándole más crema a los tacos, que they were just these horrible kids, because once again, the whole division of races, and they came through the border, they were not born here. So of course, like I just mentioned, this put a lot of racial tension between the raza. Like, even though they're all Mexican, because I was born here, blah blah, you came through the border, you don't even speak English, blah blah blah. Like, it was just a freaking mess, and it is sad. That is what the truth was of that moment. Okay guys, so at this moment in time, the Chavez Ravine, which a lot of you guys know as Buried Under the Blue, which is now very popularly known as the Dodger Stadium. So yeah, this area is where you would find the majority of these immigrant families, the bracero families, the working class families. They had their own community there. They had a church of their own. They had schools of their own. Very tight-knit community. They kept to themselves. And this is where you would find them. Now, for some reason, in that time, in the 40s, Naval Rescue Armory decided to put a training facility there. So what does this mean? That the servicemen would come here to this Chavez Ravine to do their training, and they'd get stationed here or in the community surrounding this naval armory. So yeah, this is what was going on now. So we have the immigrants, the bracero family, and we have the servicemen all sharing this small community. What can go wrong, right? I did highlight this specific area, this neighborhood, this community, because later on down the line, it becomes a hot spot for a lot of the violent encounters that go on with the Zooters, and pretty much where a lot of these fights take place. So, the comadre had to throw it in there, make it easy for you guys. With this whole World War II that's taking place, the U.S. now has to comply with changes. Like I mentioned, all their men are overseas, so there is a shortage of everything. If you are car people, you know that during the war years there was no cars being built. We had to cut back on a bunch of everyday supplies, foods, and one material in particular that we had to cut back was wool. Back in those days, as you guys are aware and you have seen, everybody used to dress in suits and this and coats and skirts and dresses, and they were made of wool. Wool was one of those precious materials that showed obviously you were distinguished or simply saved up enough money to buy yourself Sunday's best, right? There was two in particular changes that were pretty much like forced and mandated. One of them was conscription. ¿Qué es eso, comadre? Deje y les digo. It is where it is by law mandated that you had to enlist in the services. Mainly military service. The whole world was at war. You had to show up because you had to show up. Number two was rationing. It is the control, distribution of scarce resources, goods, or artificial restrictions of demand. That is where our wool falls into play, because we had to ration over sizes and portions, and that included foods, like I mentioned. Okay, so in January of 1942, the then President Franklin Roosevelt established something which was known as the War Production Board, the WPB as it was known. So this was an agency that was created in particular to monitor all the production that was being done during World War II. Here is this logo. And yes, this was a very big part of the history in that time. Well, we forward to March of 1942, the WPB was putting regulations to the use of the foods like I mentioned and wool. They needed to achieve a 26% cutback for the use of this fabric, which included men's suits and long women skirts or dresses. So what did this mean? For women, if you follow the fashions of the forever times, this is when women's dresses and skirts became short. They were no longer ankle length. They were either at the knee or at mid-calf. Yes, guys, not because the señoras got risque and they wanted to be so sexy. It was just really hard to come up on fabric, and you needed that cutback. It was actually mandated, so you had to stay within the law, right? For men, what did this mean? Those beautiful, very unique zoot suits, which were very popular at that time, were now a big no-no. ¿Por qué? Because the material used to create just one of the zoot suits was considered to be a big waste because they were huge. Because of these mandates, a lot of the companies that were manufacturing these zoot suits ceased all operations. They were no longer doing it. Como siempre está the sneaky, and there was some companies here in Los Angeles and back in New York City that were still doing these suits on the hush-hush because they were considered the bootleggers of the moment. Of course, the youth of the time and the men that already owned suits continued to use them. Pues, ¿por qué no? You already had them. Why not wear them, right? So this is where we were with all this wool, this fashion, this mandate, and the big no-nos. So what is a zoot suit for you guys that don't know? Picture the mask, kind of. That's what it is. It's a suit with super huge shoulder pads. The jacket runs up to your knees. Got the peg leg trousers, very flowy by the way, which are tapered at the ankles. And they originated in the 30s in communities such as Harlem, Chicago, and Detroit. So era algo de moda about 10 years prior to when they hit hard here in Los Angeles. Now, a little bit earlier, in the early 40s, they were made really popular by the jazz players and the jumping blue musicians. So the reason why the ankles were tapered so tight is cuando estaban bailando su jitterbug, they wouldn't rip the suit, or the girls they were dancing with wouldn't get tangled and trip and fall y pues hacer otro desmadre y medio, right? So there is a purpose to that. A lot of the times they use accessories such as the big chain you see. They had the hat, the big feather, and they used to wear really nice dressy shoes. That was the ensemble behind a zoot suit. Well, to the youth, it was all the rave. Todos querían andar ahí zooting. But to these servicemen and the regular civilians, these zoot suits were disrespectful and unpatriotic because of the time and day they were living, which the World War was happening, and they had specifically ordered to please be more mindful with materials, period. Like, these kids didn't care, and it was just disrespectful all the way around. Even though the WPB had this strict order, these young kids still wore their suits with pride. They used to be very bright in color, which was to signify the new culture and movement. So in their head, it represented that they were against slum lifestyles. So in other words, they were what was happening, you know. Lo aquello del abuelo, no more. We're in with the new. Like I mentioned, these chains and these dress-up shoes were to exaggerate the look they had on. You know, to represent the whole money thing. Because they didn't have any, but that's when they were in persona of the zoot suit. That's what that was for. Well, we had all these kids in the community, and we had a lot of the servicemen running around. Like I mentioned, they have the naval training field at the Chavez Ravine, and a lot of these servicemen were stationed here in Los Angeles, and they were waiting to be thrown out to the war. So this is where they were at. A lot of them were on leave as well, and you know, some of them had their families. The ones that didn't have kids yet, their wives, their girlfriends. And that's what the day looked like here in Los Angeles back in this time. So all these servicemen and the older Angelinos, they thought that these kids, all these people that were still using their suits, were very disrespectful. And they resented them like big time. You know, they're like, here we are sacrificing ourselves. You know, our family's here. We're far away from home because we're ready to go back out there to fight for this country. You're told as a mandate to watch what you guys are wearing. We need to cut back on certain materials. And here you guys are wearing these zoot suits, not caring. Even though you guys are rebelling and you're so cool, like, it's still not cool to us. Like, what about us, you know? So pretty soon there was these little laws that came into effect. So the officials started saying that all these people who were still wearing the zoot suits said it was immoral and associated those terms with petty crime. Like, you're wearing your suit, you're gonna get in trouble. It's considered a petty crime. Ven pa' acá, ticket, let me take you to jail overnight, whatever. Like, it was a big deal now to be wearing these zoot suits. So now that we did the whole backstory on where these zoot suits originated from, why they were so popular, all about the Bracero Act, the differences between our races within races, let me tell you guys what set these riots off, okay? So deje y les cuento lo ocurrido. So on the night of June 3rd, 1943, there is these sailors, 11 of them to be exact. They're on Main Street in downtown Los Angeles and they get off on their stop. Okay, yeah, they're walking. While they're walking, they run into a group of these kids, these youths wearing their zoots. Okay, at this point, now we're getting into a little different scenario. A lot of these kids that were wearing these zoot suits, like I mentioned, were known as the pachucos. ¿Qué es eso, comadre? The pachucos of the 40s were the cholos of today. Supposedly, they're trouble, they're no good, they're up to crimes, this and that. You name it, that's what they would do. Okay, so anyways, these 11 sailors get off of this bus on Main Street in downtown Los Angeles, and they run into this group of pachucos. They meet halfway on the sidewalk. They start this huge argument. Okay, your mother this, your mother that, you look like this, you look like that, you smell like this. I don't know, that's just what I'm assuming. I mean, it's like, how can people just argue if they don't even know each other and for no real apparent reason, right? Anyways, that's literally what it was. Just an argument, a huge argument, shouting and screaming and blah, blah, blah on both sides. And that was the end. Okay. Los pachucos continued on their journey, the sailors on theirs. A few blocks down, the sailors run into police officers, the LAPD. And they tell them, hey, down the street by the bus stop, we just got jumped by a bunch of the pachucos. They're all wearing their zoots. Look at, we're beat up. They started hitting us. Blah, blah, blah. This and that. This and that. The police officers believed everything the servicemen told them right off the bat. Obviously, the kids, these pachucos, already had a very bad rep, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video. So, ahí van la policía. Lots of officers responded to this situation, and a lot of officers which were off duty at the time, they had what was called a vengeance squad, which I think is the gang task force of today. So there they all go, because they're gonna clean up Main Street in Los Angeles. So they're on their way, and at this point, everything is boiling over. If you are in a zoot suit, if you are a pachuco, if you are a minority youngster, problems are coming your way. I'm gonna end today's video here, just so you guys know that it's relatable, the opening scene to American Me and what happened with the Zoots and the 40s in that time. Living in Los Angeles, being Mexican American, was a very harsh time. Y pues I will divide this whole episode into maybe 2 other pieces, because there's just so much violent issues that came out of these riots that spread across the country, not just here in LA. So con eso los dejo, raza, el día de hoy. Please stay safe, stay sane. Los adoro. Bye.